Good evening, welcome to GetUp Live. We're coming to you not from our dingy office in Surrey Hills tonight, but from the lovely Kirribilli House, the official residence of the Prime Minister here in Sydney. And we're very grateful that the Prime Minister has given us nearly an hour of his time in the middle of a very busy election campaign. Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
Happy to do it, Sam.
And we should note that we've extended the invitation to Tony Abbott to join us for a similar session, but we haven't heard back from his office yet. So this is our chance as 600,000 GetUp members across the country to ask questions directly of the Prime Minister, and we've had thousands of questions flow in the last 2 days. We've tried to select the ones that are most popular and we'll ask them, but of course we've only got limited time. So you can help me out by submitting some questions on Twitter using the hashtag AskRud. But Prime Minister, I thought we'd start off with one of the most popular questions that has come in this afternoon. It's a very important one. Tony Abbott made his appeal to the Big Brother household this week by asking people to vote for the man with the not bad looking daughters. Strategically, I mean, electorally, do you think you've missed an opportunity by underutilising the sex appeal of Marcus Rudd?
Marcus Rudd, together with Nicholas Rudd, his brother.
Well, Nicholas is engaged, so we don't want to,
Well, no, I just want to be very upfront about this. And Jessica Rudd, my daughter, I would describe all three of my children as first-class human beings. And I think their humanity is what I appreciate most. And I think the people who work with them as well. So Marcus, he's 19 years old, and I don't know how he's going to turn out, but he's a decent guy.
One of the questions that GetUp members have put in is to ask you about when you started up in politics, when you first got into this game. What was the issue that motivated you? Where did your first fire come from?
I think three things actually. As a kid growing up, after my father died, this was back in the early 70s, late 60s, we found ourselves in an environment where we didn't have a secure home. And so I just felt, frankly, a bit humiliated by all of that. I didn't understand politics at all, but just as a kid I thought it was wrong. Later on, when I saw my mum scrimping and saving to send me off to university, and then I heard of what Gough Whitlam was doing, I thought, whatever he's doing, I like, because it meant something to me. And then finally, as a kid growing up in rural Queensland, what I really appreciated about those days in the Whitlam government was the early recognition of China. And that sort of created a piece of inspiration for me, which is why I ended up studying Chinese, among other things.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think you've stacked up against the Whitlam legacy that inspired you?
Oh, Gough is right out there as I said to him recently, the great helmsman of us all. And we lesser lights, we just follow in his wake. But frankly, all these leaders have done good things. If I look at Hawke and the creation of Medicare, if I look at what Paul Keating did with the universalisation of superannuation for working people, not just for rich people, what Julia has done in the work that she has supported for Disability Care Australia, each of these things is contributions to what I describe as progressive politics.
Yeah. I'll take you now to climate change if I could, because
yeah, sure.
when we poll GetUp members, as we've done this year, it's very clear that the number one priority for them is climate change. And I want to start off with a question that's been submitted by a young woman, Amelia. She's from Orange in New South Wales, although she's in Nepal at the moment. And she wrote in, Mr. Rudd, my name is Amelia. I'm a 19-year-old Indigenous woman from Bunjalung country. I'm currently in Nepal with 12 other young Australians, and we'll be hiking to Mount Everest to raise awareness for climate change. We're witnessing the severe impacts of climate change in the land and the Nepalese community firsthand here, and we're concerned that political leaders around the world are not doing enough. Until we move away from coal and gas, climate change will continue to impact in Nepal and in the Great Barrier Reef. How can Australia move to being powered by renewable energy and away from coal and gas?
Well, the question's a really good one. And I would point out 2 or 3 things we've done and what more we've still got to do. Number one, as you may recall, the first action of our government upon being elected was to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Why is that important? Because for the first time we embraced a legal framework which required us not just to act nationally but globally, with global targets. And if we're re-elected, we'll be ratifying Kyoto too. And I don't think Mr. Abbott will be in a hurry to do that. Secondly, domestically, I was pleased when I was first elected as Prime Minister to push through the mandatory renewable energy target legislation. This is very big. It means that by 2020, 20% of our total electricity generation in this country has to come from renewable sources. And so what you've seen as a result of that is a huge explosion in the clean energy industry in this country. Whether it's wind farms or whether it's solar, all sorts of different things happening, as well as demand reduction in traditional coal-fired electricity supply. One little example is that when we were elected, I think we had about 7,500 solar panels on roofs in Australia. Now we've got more than 1 million. The renewable energy sector itself has grown by about 30%. And I think on top of all those measures, we've also seen huge progress through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation as well. The very last thing is a price on carbon. We'll be moving to a globally connectable emissions trading scheme as of 1 July next year. So these are very concrete actions. But to go to the heart of the question, I've met the people from the government of Bhutan who have described to me the problems in the Himalayas as well. And I've seen the photographs of them meeting as cabinets sort of up there amidst the rapidly melting snows. And so I get it in terms of what's happening around the world. We must act nationally in a globally consistent fashion, and that's why we will always be round the table with all the major economies saying, we're acting, you need to act as well. Not sort of sliding off to one side, which I fear is what Mr. Abbott does.
You spoke there about global targets, and I guess the last year has been a very important one because we've seen a lot of progress from China, from the States. In the States, they now have a 17% target effectively by 2020. Do you think that Australia needs to increase our targets and needs you to be matching that?
Yeah, our first, well, you're right, we now see global action. What I worry about with Mr. Abbott is us ending up as the climate change pariahs around the world. So let's just go to it. Our targets that we've accepted nationally and logged globally are to reduce by 2020 our carbon emissions by 5% against 2000 levels. And we are moving in that direction already. We've been in office, for about 5.5 years. There's a 7% reduction in emissions from the electricity generation sector. So what we have as a policy ambition is that consistent with further global action, then we will always look at increasing our emissions reduction targets in the future. And we made that fairly plain when I represented Australia at the Copenhagen summit some years ago. So all countries need to do more, but if any country starts to do less, like Australia, do you know what it does? It gives like a moral license to everyone else to just slack off. And then, your generation, mate, you're a little younger than I am, and those who come after you, you'll pay the price. And I don't want that sort of blot on my conscience at all.
You speak about the impact that Australia has internationally, and one of the important ways that we impact the climate, of course, is our coal and our coal exports. The consensus has become that 80% of the fossil fuels that are on the ledger books at the moment have to stay in the ground if we're not going to exceed 2 degrees. And I think that's something that that even the Climate Commission, who was appointed by your government, have come to represent. Do you agree with that statement? And what does it mean for the future of exporting coal in Australia for how we address our fossil fuel reserves?
Well, this is a hard one because, as you know, a whole lot of folks are employed in the coal industry. But we take our responsibilities seriously. But rather than just hit an industry, what we do is, shall I say, universalise the price across the whole economy and expect people to respond accordingly by moving to renewables. And as other countries do the same, the global demand for carbon-intensive fuels will, I think, change in the future as well. There's one other thing which is often looked at sceptically by the environmental movement is the possibilities of carbon sequestration, and that is carbon emissions being stored effectively underground. That we have a large investment program in as well. But overall, what I just say is, rather than just target an industry, we believe the best way to handle all this across the economy is to target the price of carbon. and then people will follow the price. And that means that if you're going to be hugely carbon intensive in the future, both here and offshore, then you're going to make pretty significant energy choices as well.
Mm. There are multiple impacts on the price of coal, of course. One is the price that that people who are importing it put on it themselves in the domestic market, and another is how much does it cost to get out of the ground and out of the country. That's impacted by, for example, dredging through the Great Barrier Reef to make channels for coal ships. Is there a role for Australia to say, look, we have 1/12 of the world's fossil fuel reserves. We can't burn it any more than that. We need to do something to keep some of this in the ground or protect our Great Barrier Reef as we do so.
Well, certainly in the Barrier Reef, I could take that one in particular. I know the Environment Minister, Mark Butler, has been looking very, very, very carefully at these questions as they concern future coal developments in Queensland. And he is certainly not rushing to any conclusions on this, because he's very, very mindful of reef disturbance. More broadly on the Barrier Reef, could I just say this? And it's been affected by climate change, we know that, and that's why we've got to act globally. If we are acting nationally in the absence of global action, well, it has demonstration effect, but it doesn't actually save the reef. But the other way in which you help save the reef is all this nitrogen-intensive outflows which come off the Queensland coast onto the reef, which is where we've made a huge $200 million plus investment to begin to reduce those outflows and to have them treated properly on shore. One
final question on climate change that's come through quite a lot. And I'll use the words of Harriet, a young woman from Victoria here. She says, Mr. Rudd, over the last year I have done everything I can. I've protested, I've donated, I've lobbied my politicians to try and get a price on pollution and protect it. If you should lose on Saturday and you're in opposition, will you do everything you can to stop Mr. Abbott from repealing the price?
I've been very, very direct on this, which is our position is immovable. You cannot act on climate change and push to one side a price on carbon. You just can't do it. I mean, we have an internal debate about whether it should be a fixed price or a floating price. That's a separate question. And most of the world concludes that a floating price is better because you can link it globally more effectively. But if anyone out there in the Flat Earth Society believes that you can act on climate change without putting a price on carbon by one means or another, I think they've got rocks in their head. And so our position is immovable. It's a constant position. It's a principled position, because climate change is not going to go away. Global warming is not a fiction. Mr. Abbott may have described it as absolute crap, quote unquote, his own terms, not mine. I don't accept that. I've read the science, I've read the reports by the CSIRO, I accept the conclusions on the science, I accept the thresholds in terms of carbon intensity in the atmosphere, I accept the conclusions as to what must be done if we're going to keep temperature increases within 2 degrees centigrade. And you can't do that if you junk a price on carbon.
So it's an immovable position to oppose junking the price.
So long as I draw breath.
It's a good commitment. I'll move on from climate change now to foreign aid. Today, the Liberal Party finally released their costings, and one of the savings they've introduced is a massive cut to foreign aid. From my brief reading, over $4 billion, which
4.5.
In fairness, while you've been on the backbench, the Labor government has deferred commitments to foreign aid 2 years in a row. Are we letting down the rest of the world as we take on increasing responsibility?
Well, the truth is, in the period that we've been in office, our ODA, or foreign aid, has increased enormously. I think when we started in office, it represented about 0.27% of gross national income. I think now we're up to about 0.35 or 0.36. Our target is 0.5, and we were to reach that by 2015. That has now been extended to 2017. But if I look at the graph on our ODA commitments, they are growing, frankly, more significantly in the sector of government outlays. And rightly, because we have international development responsibilities for the poorest of the poor. And I'm proud of what we've been able to achieve in the world. When the Global Fund or Gavi, the Global Alliance on Vaccines and Immunisation, come to Australia, they know that we are becoming long-term large partners with them. We're usually amongst the top 10 partners in the world with getting stuff done in disease prevention, immunisation programs, disaster relief. Take Syria at the moment. We're one of the UNHCR's largest funders. So look, our performance is not 100% perfect, but I was just horrified to see this $4.5 billion cut. That's like taking a meat axe to foreign aid. And for goodness sake, these are the poorest of the poor. And I just don't think it's right. I just don't think it's right. I don't understand how Julie Bishop could have just rolled over and allowed Tony Abbott to walk over the top of her on this. It's just wrong. That is such a massive hit. And effectively what they're doing is junking explicitly the commitment which I had on a bipartisan basis when I was previously Prime Minister with Mr Abbott of 0.5. They've junked that, they've said they'll stay where we are and simply index it to inflation. So how do we hold up our heads in the rest of the world? How do we look at poor people around the world and say, sorry, can't do that anymore? I don't get it.
In fairness, Prime Minister, they have junked it, but so too did your government defer over $1.6 billion, as I understand, of the aid increases.
As I said, we haven't been perfect, and we've pushed it out 2 years because we've had a massive adjustment problem with the global financial crisis. But we have held the line in terms of the commitment, notwithstanding a two-year extension from 2015 to 2017.
Would you expect that there could be any more deferrals if you were Prime Minister?
If we're re-elected, I don't see any basis for doing that at all, because I believe Australians are intrinsically a generous folk, and they actually want to see, either through their direct contributions to non-government development organisations like UNICEF or World Vision or Caritas, or those sorts of outfits, Oxfam, as well as seeing their taxpayer dollars at work as well. Yeah. And so for me, I don't see any grounds whatsoever for any further extension of our aid commitment beyond 2017. We've committed to the Millennium Development Goals. You're not going to get there if people walk out the door backwards.
I have a follow-up question, my last question on aid, which comes from Tom in Victoria. A lot of Australians have been very disappointed to see our foreign aid being spent not on helping foreigners, but on refugee processing in Australia. Do you think that's an appropriate way to budget our foreign aid? Is there a better way to account?
What I'd like to see in the future, if the government's re-elected, is to begin to reduce that down, and for these to be handled elsewhere within government budgetary arrangements over time. And my overall view is that yes, we have obligations to UNHCR, which is an international body which we happily fund. Some of the arrangements we do in the region are in partnership with the UNHCR, but I think there are other purposes to which foreign aid is more properly put over time. Can't do that in an instant. I'd like to transition to that over a period of time. Because what are the main things? If you look at the foreign aid review over which I presided as Foreign Minister only a couple of years ago. 1, saving people's lives. Number 2, protecting women. 3, making sure that we engage in the best agricultural development programs for poor people around the world. Number 4, ensure that we also are providing people with the health and education programs to keep them alive. That's what our focus should be. And I'm proud of what we've done. We need to do better in the future.
So that's a commitment over time to reduce the amount of aid that's being spent on refugee processing. Do you have a period in mind in which
I'd be misrepresenting the facts if I did that. I'm just saying that's where I think the priority should be over time. I understand the reasons why my predecessor did that and the difficult budgetary circumstances in which we've been.
But it wouldn't be the approach of your government to increase that or to...
If I'm re-elected, my attitude would be to reduce that proportion over time that currently goes to, shall I say, domestic processing arrangements. And as I've said elsewhere, also I want to also look at the possibility of increasing the total humanitarian quota for refugees coming to Australia from 20 to 27,000 as recommended by the Houston Review, contingent on the successful implementation of the regional resettlement arrangement. Because I believe we have a global responsibility to back the Refugees Convention and to back the humanitarian program. I notice our opponents are reducing the humanitarian program from 20 down to 12. I think we can do better than that.
I was going to come back to refugees later, but I might now throw to a video question. I understand we have a video question from Western Australia.
Okay.
on the topic of asylum seekers. If we can get that video question up now.
Hi Prime Minister, my name is Theresa Lee. I'm a social worker. This is my husband Jared McKenna. He's a teaching pastor at West City Church and National Advisor for World Vision. Last year, through the support of the Australian community, we crowdsourced a mortgage of $600,000 in just 14 days to purchase our first home.
The reason why the Australian community backed us so strongly is that First Home Project isn't just our first home, it's the first home for 14 other people who are asylum seekers and recently arrived refugees. Prime Minister, it's our hope that First Home Project might actually model welcome and hospitality as a real alternative to the cruelty of mandatory detention. As you probably know, the UNHCR has estimated that the cost of processing asylum seekers in community is between $7 to $39 a day per asylum seeker, depending on the level of support, versus the $339 it costs to process each asylum seeker offshore in cruel conditions. Prime Minister, we realise how difficult the political situation for you is at the moment, and we're praying for you. But our shared hero, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, says that our Christianity stands and falls on its plea for the weak. We're hoping that in this moment you'll admit that mandatory detention makes no economic sense, let alone ethical sense. And Prime Minister, our question is, would you consider welcome and hospitality as a real alternative to the cruelty of mandatory detention? Thank you.
So the question from Jared, I guess, is given the economic realities, given the ethics involved, would you consider welcome and hospitality as an alternative to mandatory detention?
It's a tough one. It really is tough because our instincts as Australians is to be welcoming. In fact, one of the things that is said to me most often around the world is that the nice thing about Australians is they're welcoming of visitors and foreigners. I think it's kind of in our nature. But here's the other difficult point, and that is all Australians expect us to have an orderly migration system. It's not as if we're closing the doors to migration. We have a vast migration system to this country. And regular migration, student visas, working holiday visas, short-term work permits, etc. And the refugees program, which as I said is now risen to 20,000. What we sought to do is to implement a policy of making sure we don't have kids behind razor wire, that we don't have kids in mandatory detention, that we don't have, wherever possible, families with kids in mandatory detention. And we're looking at a range of other programs for the Immigration Minister, Tony Burke, to use more community-based detention. But there are certain folks who our authorities judge do need to remain within detention, and that is what we do by way of policy. These are hard judgments. You can't make like a universal call about everybody. And I've got to say, dealing with refugees policy, asylum seekers policy, and dealing with the question of people smugglers is one of the hardest things I've faced as Prime Minister of the country. Because you're constantly torn between humanitarian obligations on the one hand, preventing people or reducing the numbers of folk who drown at sea because they're jumping onto leaky boats provided by people smugglers, at the same time treating people humanely when they arrive here until we determine their refugee status.
I have a follow-up question from Owen in Sydney, who asks, there's an increasing cleavage between the Greens' approach to this issue and Labor's approach. Why do you think that, what is missing from the Greens' approach? Why do you think that their solution is unworkable?
It's pretty basic. What is there in the Greens' policy which will deter people from jumping onto leaky boats and drowning in greater and greater numbers? I can't find the solution to that elsewhere. And whenever I've confronted people, so what's the alternative? I can't get an answer. Now, I've thought about this for a long, very long time. We would be immoral in our position if at the same time we were not increasing the humanitarian intake of refugees through the regular channels of the UNHCR by going to camps around the world and increasing the numbers who come here. And we have, and we stand ready to do so again. But I don't think you can simply turn a blind eye or your moral responsibilities away from this core question. If we now have hundreds each year drowning by jumping onto boats, and the numbers keep going up in terms of the total folk who come, and that turns into thousands each year, that's a moral question as well. And so therefore, that's what I don't think works in the Greens calculus. And they, in my experience, kind of circle around that one whenever I put it as bluntly and as baldly as that, which I've got to. I'm the bloke who runs the country.
I guess a somewhat related question, which we've had quite a few of. I'll read out the way that Paul, a member from Hobart, put it. In some electorates around the country, he says, we have multiple progressive parties to choose to vote for. In Denison, I could choose to vote for Andrew Wilkie as an independent, for the Greens, or for Labor. Prime Minister, he asks, why should I vote Labor if I'm in one of these electorates?
Look, everybody will reach their own conclusions on that. I'm not in the business of dictating to people the way they should vote. Number one, my commitment's obviously to the Labor Party. I've been a member for 32 years. And my experience is no political party ever perfectly fits your progressive policy compass. It never has done and never will do. What you've got to make a judgment on is what provides the best vehicle for delivering progressive policy outcomes. And that's why I joined the Labor Party. But if you put together all those questions, like on climate change policy, our policy is very strong, very robust. What we've done in the period we've been in office, I'm proud of. When I look at other ethical responsibilities within the remit of progressive politics in providing proper needs-based funding for schools right across the country, overcoming the digital divide between rich schools and poor schools so that all kids have computers, overcoming the digital divide on broadband so that poor suburbs, rich suburbs, little country towns, big cities, inner city, outer suburbs, they all get the same, and the universal wholesale price and universal guarantees. That's progressive politics too, and making sure that anyone who's crook gets decent and proper first-class healthcare. So progressive politics is a wide remit. But people make their own judgments in individual cases about who they think best fits. But as I said today at the National Press Club, when I was explaining what I think progressive politics is, which accepts the absurd proposition that we can actually make a better world than the one we inherited, I fully embrace that, quote, absurdity. And that's why I'm in the business. You make a difference in people's lives, as opposed to conservatives who say the perfect future lies back there somewhere. Some mythical point in the past with this kind of rose-coloured glasses view that back there in the 19th century there was life was as good as it's ever going to get. That's why I'm in the progressive side.
I'll take you now to education, if I could, and I have a question from Gemma, who wrote in from Queensland. And Gemma asked, the Gonski Review identified that Australia's schools are in a bit of trouble. Inequality is deepening and widening and our performance is slipping. Do you believe that the additional funding will address these problems? And why was it so difficult to get state premiers on board?
Well, state premiers often behave like state premiers, which is they were worried, I think, that we were demanding such a large additional commitment from them. In a nutshell, what's the Better Schools Plan, aka Gonski, all about? It's needs-based funding formula. It applies to all schools, Catholic, independent, state. And thirdly, it is based on a massive investment by us of an additional $10 billion through to 2019, and a co-investment with the states of $5 billion over the same period. When some of the states looked at that, they nearly died and said, hey, that's all very good, but just give us some money and go away. Now, we've refused to do that. And in Queensland, where, is it Gemma who asked you the question, comes from, it's pretty sad. If I'm re-elected as Prime Minister, I want to sit down with the Premier up there and try and work it through, because we need to. So it's the amount of money, it's a needs-based formula, but it's also to provide schools with a more flexible and additional budget to deal with greater one-on-one attention for kids. If you're falling behind, bit of private tuition, but paid for publicly through the school. If you are being held back, if you're some child prodigy, I'm sure you were one of those at one stage, Sam.
Speak for yourself, mate.
No, talking about you. Then they might need some one-on-one to take them further. And so it's giving schools that funding flexibility. But you know, we've actually made big progress. Kids who had no computers, schools with no computers now have them. Schools with no libraries or no modern libraries now have them. We built 3,000 of these new ones around the country. The kids in poor schools just find these oases of learning. Makes my heart sing when I see these things. It's good. You make a difference.
You could be singing one of your top 5 songs today, Handel's Messiah perhaps, or a bit of...
bit of Handel's Messiah. Someone asked me on ABC Radio what my 2 favourite songs were. Was it ABC? Maybe it was. It was one of the regional radio stations anyway. So I gave them Bach, Geez, You Joy of Man's Desiring. He said, mate, on our radio station, that's a first. But I did give him Cat Stevens as well. So Moon Shadow, Moon Shadow.
You're doing better than Eagle Rock, which I think was Malcolm Turnbull's choice. A question on that's come up a lot in various forms from GetUp members is about the shifting of power in the last 6 years. And Dion from New South Wales, I think, put it pretty well. And he wrote in, it seems that that over the last 6 years, vested interests have waged unprecedented campaigns to get what they want. His question is, Prime Minister, why is that working? I guess to be more specific, I would point to the mining tax campaign, the Clubs Australia campaign on pokie reform. I mean, do you think that there's been a shift in power over the last 6 years? Have corporate vested interests gained more leverage?
I think corporate interests, when they put their mind to it through highly organised lobbying exercises, in Australia are becoming more like it is in the United States. That worries me. You may remember I was on the receiving end of the mining tax campaign when we had the audacity to suggest that miners should pay a super profits tax if they were earning not billions but squillions. That I think they saw as tantamount to the beginning of the socialisation of production, distribution and exchange. So I saw that, and as you know, it was a pretty ugly experience. And we've seen other corporate interests seek to organise and have their way as well, where their corporate interests may be at stake. I think one of the things that you need to look at in the future for an election campaign in particular is the introduction of broader electoral reforms. The Canadian system, for example, on corporate, on election financing and putting caps on campaign expenditure, I think is important. I spoke to the Canadians about that. Even though they're a Conservative government there, they believe that this has been necessary to frankly reduce the ability of corporates to obtain too much political purchase.
So do you think if there's a Rudd government, the next 3 years we'll have a government that looks seriously at the idea of expenditure caps during election campaigns?
Absolutely. I foreshadowed this today in the National Press Club. Someone asked me about the future of political reform, party reform, electoral reform. I spoke a little bit about the future of the Labor Party, but then on the broader question of electoral reform said, look, I think it's getting to the stage whereby if one side of politics, aka the Liberals, are going to get a huge bucket of money from corporates who stand to benefit from the abolition of the mining tax or from other corporate and vested interests, then I worry about the stage where we get to whereby large corporates can begin to effectively buy election outcomes by the simple volume of advertising they can buy. As you've seen in this election campaign, we've been outspent phenomenally by the Conservatives in this barrage of ads, which basically blame me for the collapse of Western civilization. Well, that's all been funded by corporates, in the main anyway. So I think we've got to be mindful of the health of the democracy long term. And that's why I said today we should consider, examine, and after that, act on the application of the most appropriate elements of the Canadian package.
There have been 2 packages introduced in Australia in recent years for electoral reform, one in New South Wales and one in your home state of Queensland, which are mostly focused on caps of donations. The Premier in Queensland has just announced that they're going to scrap those caps. What's been your reflection on that experience? Are donation caps enough? Are expenditure caps needed as well?
I think you've got to have both, frankly. Unless you have an expenditure cap for an entire campaign, and frankly, you could buy anything. And people ultimately are influenced by advertising. If advertising didn't work, the industry wouldn't exist. That's a pretty axiomatic point. So that's one thing. The second is caps on individual donations is something we should advance much more considerably. And as you know, the changes which the Conservatives have introduced in these areas in recent years basically turn it into open slather. And I think that ultimately is dangerous for democracy, particularly when you have large media outlets who side almost exclusively with one side of politics as well. That on the one hand, massive campaign donations, funding advertising on the other, it becomes a very crowded space to get your own message up.
I mean, GetUp members have experienced that firsthand in the last week, running a campaign that GetUp members chipped in $250,000 to run on air, criticising Murdoch media for their coverage during the election. We were rebuffed in putting that out on air by all the major networks.
Well, it didn't go to air.
They refused to run it.
Well, because you were hopping into Rupert.
Well, because they said they found the ad distasteful. And Channel 7 said, Channel 9 and 10 said that they didn't agree with the message. What do you think has been the role of the media in this election campaign? Has it been different to...
That's pretty disturbing what you just said. I didn't know all of that. I saw, I think online, the ad you're talking about. Yeah, it's a bit in your face. It's a sort of classic get-up sort of ad. But for goodness sake, it's a free country. You should be able to express your point of view. So I'm a bit surprised, a bit disappointed by that. On the question you just touched on, I think all of your viewers, all of your GetUp supporters, I think will reach their own conclusions about whether they've seen fair and balanced reporting in the print media during the course of this election campaign. I mean, I imagine on Saturday morning the front page of the Daily Telegraph will be headed something like exclusive, Rudd found guilty of causing World War II. So I'm sure, you know, that sort of... I think people reach their own conclusions on that.
Yeah.
But hopefully people just kind of see through it as well. So it's a tricky area. We believe in freedom of the press, the freedom of these media moguls to go and say what they want to say. But I haven't quite seen a campaign like this one.
If I could take you to coal seam gas as an issue. I have a question that's come in from Rosemary, who lives
It's an inelegant segue, you know.
Well, I was in my mind. I was going from gas of a different kind to coal seam gas.
That's very funny.
Rosemary from New South Wales has written into us and said that she lives in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales and owns a farm that CSG companies have started drilling on. She cares about her farm, her water, and her health, and it seems to her that coal seam gas is a major threat to all of those. She says she's been a Labor voter all her life. How is it that she's considering voting for Bob Katter? What can you do to persuade her?
I think in that neck of the woods, look, I know the local members very well up there, Janelle Saffin, and when I've spoken to Janelle about these questions, and Justine Elliott up in the seat of Richmond as well, it's quite plain that they're reflecting the views of their communities on CSG. And our attitude to CSG is really, it depends where it happens. And if you're in built-up areas and quite intense farming areas like the ones you've just described up there in the Northern Rivers, you've got to scratch your head about whether it's appropriate in those sorts of environments. I do, certainly. It doesn't mean that CSG activity in, shall I say, different physical environments is not appropriate, because going back to the greenhouse gas question and carbon emissions, as you know, gas is less carbon intensive than coal. And so under those circumstances, there is a relative preference to develop further our gas industry. But up there in the Northern Rivers, all I'd say is I really understand what both Janelle and Justine, our two members up there, have been saying. And they have led the push in terms of national environmental law changes. And that is designed specifically to make sure that in areas such as that, prime farmland, for example, that we take a long, hard look at what's an appropriate decision in areas like that. So if your person's asked the question, picks up the phone to Justine, if she lives in Richmond, or if she lives in Page, to Janelle Saffin, I think she'd have a very clear answer as to what their position is, but more acutely, what we can do in government to make sure that appropriate decisions are made for areas where you have such dense populations and farming activity.
So it's a direct endorsement from the Prime Minister. Pick up your phone, get on the phone and hassle your local MPs about coal seam gas.
Well, it's true. It really does depend on where you live. And so, and that part of the world, I know it reasonably well because it's not dissimilar to where I grew up.
The question of Indigenous rights and Indigenous health has come up quite a lot in the questions we've been receiving. I have to say it hasn't received a lot of attention throughout the campaign. Catherine from New South Wales wrote into us and said there seems to have been very little discussion of Indigenous affairs. What's your vision for a Labor government raising the literacy rates and health prospects of Indigenous Australians?
Well, very strong. I mean, I'm the author of the apology, and in the apology itself, I outlined a framework for improving health and education, employment and housing outcomes for Indigenous Australians. It's called the National Closing the Gap Strategy. And within 6, 7 or 8 defined areas, we've established targets over the next 5, 10, 15 years to be met. And furthermore, we signed the first Closing the Gap intergovernmental agreement between the states and territories, binding everyone to do the same. And on top of that again, requiring the Prime Minister of the day on the anniversary of the apology to deliver a formal report on progress, regress, where we're getting it right, where we're getting it wrong. So we're held to account for what we've committed to do. The good news is, in a couple of those indicators, we're on track. For example, early childhood education opportunities for Indigenous kids, which we will meet. In other areas, like literacy and numeracy, we are not doing as well as we need, particularly at the secondary school level. I was asked about this at the National Press Club today, and apart from what I've just said on closing the gap, there is also the challenge of constitutional recognition, which I believe must be a top priority to resolve and conclude in the next term of Parliament.
A lot of questions that have come in on Twitter in the last couple of hours have dealt with the new spectre of an internet filter in Australia. We have a great number of GetUp members, I think about 120,000, who've campaigned against the original idea of a mandatory internet filter.
Yeah, we heard their message. Apart from all that, it just didn't work.
Well, that was part of the message.
No, we got it. We're a bit slow, got there. Fine.
It was an effective campaign and we had fun doing it, but we'd rather not have to do it again. Tony Abbott has brought up the spectre of a mandatory internet filter again today. Where would a government that you lead stand on that?
Well, given our experience, we've reached 2 conclusions. That sort of mandatory internet filter just doesn't work, and particularly when measured against the civil liberties implications. The other point we'd make is this. In terms of the protection of children, which is something we all feel passionately about, the response that we have made is to work closely with Interpol on what is called the most sites, and using our powers under the Telecommunications Act, blocking those sites. And so that is the conclusion we've reached as the most effective under the circumstances we face. What I'm really suspicious about is why on earth Mr. Abbott, 24 hours before the polls open, has tried to slip this one out in the middle of the night. I mean, for goodness sake. We've learned from the experience of 07-10. We made, I think, the wrong call. And we were legitimately lobbied against for that. Thanks, guys. But at a level of practicality, it didn't deliver the objective that we were seeking either. So our position, if we return to government, is that under no circumstances would we introduce a mandatory internet filter. And if your GetUp members are out there and they are mobilised on this and active, can I just say, there's only one way to stop it, and that's to vote against Mr. Abbott. That is, you know, I just find it absurd that he could drop this out on election eve on a matter which I know from experience is highly sensitive in the community, where people have deep views, and you can't just dupe them like you're seeking to dupe people at the moment on the extent of Liberal Party cuts to jobs, health, education and broadband. by the farcical documents released by Joe Hockey and Andrew Robb today on seeking to explain their cuts for the future, when frankly most of that, all of it really, is being kept hidden.
We're getting near to the end of our time, and thank you for being so generous with us tonight, Prime Minister. So I have two final questions.
There's no gin in this, by the way.
I can smell it from here. Firstly, there's a number of issues that we haven't been able to get through. So I've devised a kind of a game to try and get through a couple.
I'm bad at these.
Your opponent, Tony Abbott, has been known as the master of the three-word slogan. So I want to...
You mean like stop the boats?
I want to test you out and see how you go in this three-word answer business. So, game is, I've got 10 questions for you.
You know what the alternative is to turn back the boats, by the way? It's buy back the boats. That's his real policy.
It's the new policy.
Well,
I'm going into the Indonesian boat business. It seems like it could
Well,
be.
given that he hasn't showed up to your program, he said to me in the first debate, why doesn't this guy just shut up? And so my response to Tony is, why doesn't this guy just turn up? Why
this is good. You're getting in the spirit of this.
Okay.
I like it. Just turn up. This is exactly the kind of three-word answer we're looking for.
Okay.
So I've got 10
I'll do
questions.
my best.
Give me your best attempt at a three-word answer. I'll give you maybe a couple more to some of these.
Hey, good.
The important issue is the selection.
Jobs, not cuts.
Good. Tony Abbott says stop the boats. You say?
High-speed broadband for all.
The best advice you've ever received.
Be true to yourself.
Finish the sentence. Clive Palmer rebuilding the Titanic is...
Just plain silly.
You get to write the headline for the Daily Telegraph on Saturday. It reads...
I've already gone to that. Well, I did say before it would
World
be...
War II, it was me.
Yeah. World War II, Rudd confesses, I caused it. There you
go. Marriage should be defined by...
the Marriage Act, which provides marriage equality for all.
And if you don't win the election on Saturday, your advice to Tony Abbott?
Stop three-word slogans.
I have one final question for you.
Haiku is okay, because that actually means that you've thought about it and distilled some thoughts into a core argument. But Tony Abbott's three-word
I wonder if you can focus group haikus. Make sure you get the essence of it distilled.
The essence is different from stop the boats, bring back the surplus in 100 years. Whatever he's on about.
The final question...
It's kind of weird, really, isn't it? If a Martian walked in and heard this being exchanged as a serious intellectual proposition for the future of a nation, stop the boats.
Stop the waste also.
Yeah, that's right, going to do that.
Cut the tax.
Yeah, that's right, cut the tax. That's right. It's economical, just that there's nothing inside it as a policy.
A final question that a couple of members wrote in about.
I didn't do it.
Was just to ask advice.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of thousands of GetUp members out there who are committed activists. They believe in a more progressive future for Australia, and I wonder if you have any reflections or advice for them on the years to come.
Yeah, two or three things. I say this to young folks in particular around the country, and I try to do it in a way which doesn't sound sort of preachy or paternalistic. So stop me if it sounds preachy or paternalistic. Number one, I think it's really important, particularly during your university years and beyond, to work out what you believe in and why. Establishing your essential sort of moral compass, the things that matter for you and the reasons why they matter to you. The reason I say that, you need to be anchored in a set of beliefs, philosophical, religious, whatever, which actually see you through the ups and downs in life. Number two, work out in your head what you can actually practically do about giving effect to those deep beliefs. For example, we spent a lot of time tonight talking about climate change. How do I give effect to that? Am I going to be a professional climatologist? Am I going to be a financier who gets into the business of helping clean energy corporations get off the ground, or what? And then thirdly, once you've worked that out, become the best you possibly can at it, either as a climatologist or as a financier, so that you are world beaters at it. Then put the three together, you're cooking with gas. but not coal seam.
We started the election campaign with Cooking with Gas in the very first press conference. I'm glad to see you brought it back.
That's true.
I have to ask one final question for the older GetUp members, because it's a core demographic that's perhaps underestimated, is the 50 plus GetUp members who have been long-term activists. Is it effective? What can they do in the next 3 years to make their voices heard in Parliament?
Just before you start, I just thought, it's been a long day. Probably a glass of red is a really good idea, don't you think?
Thank you, darling. This is Therese, and she will answer the question you've just put.
What was the question?
The question, thank you, and
By the way,
cheers.
Cheers.
The question...
This is not organised, by the way, but if we've been married for 32 years, she understands what I need at this time of day.
The question, Therese, was any advice you have for GetUp members, particularly people who are parents or grandparents over the next couple of years. What can they do to make their voices heard, whoever forms Parliament?
I think that GetUp is a fantastic way of democratising participation. I think it's a wonderful way to have your voice heard. I have thought for a long time it would be a wonderful way to democratise the Labor Party as a model, because people can put forward their ideas, they can say what they care about, they can easily be heard. And in lots of ways, the Labor Party has kind of been organised around you go to a meeting once a month. If you can't get to a meeting, it's kind of, it's lovely, you go and see people you know, but this is a great alternative and additional way to participate. So I would love to see for the Australian Labor Party to adopt a GetUp kind of model for.
So we'd put them out of business, though.
No, not necessarily. GetUp members
put us out of business or put us into power.
GetUp members could choose where they belong, and they still can. They can be a member of the Labor Party and a member of GetUp, can't they?
They can.
Currently.
They're members of a great many political parties.
Exactly, and they can be a member of GetUp and a member of whichever party they want to.
You got any Palmer United members?
We do have a few. We've done some polls. The Levy's refugees policy.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, but just on that, the thing that constantly impresses me about outfits like yours, but more broadly, is that people power can and does work if it's harnessed. So to go to your question about folk over 50, the great thing about those sort of folks, I'll be 50 soon, is that they often have the experience and the organisational skills to actually haul these things together, and often in terms of the basic financing of campaigns and organisations as well. And so a progressive voice, reflected through multiple means, including mainstream political parties like ours, is so important for the future when it stands against a series of often quite hidden and disclosed corporate interests. Like this guy Roger Corbett the other night. For goodness sake, fronts on, what was it? Late Line? As the member of the Reserve Bank board, without disclosing, I didn't even know this, that he was a member of the Liberal Party, and had kicked in, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, campaign donations to the Liberal Party as well, without saying or declaring that on the ABC.